I should have never answered the ad. The bold headline screamed Santa needed for an exclusive event. It promised $1,500 for a single night's work. That kind of cash for one night of playing Santa felt too good to pass up. The ad mentioned it was for a wealthy client hosting a private Christmas party in a remote cabin. I figured it would just be a spoiled rich kid's party with overindulgent parents trying to buy a picture-perfect holiday memory. I filled out the application and submitted a photo of myself in a Santa suit that I'd use for mall gigs. My belly was real, but my beard, though fake, looked convincing. The next day, I got an email with directions to the cabin. No phone number, no additional details. Just GPS coordinates deep in the woods and instructed to arrive at 8 p.m. sharp on Christmas Eve. The drive out was unnerving. Snow fell thick and heavy, turning the winding roads into a slippery nightmare. My GPS struggled to maintain a signal, recalculating every 5 minutes. By the time I arrived, the cabin loomed out of the trees like something from a fairy tale. Twinkling lights strung along the eaves seemed festive enough, but something about the place felt wrong. The air was too still, the silence oppressive. My headlights caught something odd as I parked. A dozen deer skulls mounted along the fence, their hollow eye sockets staring blankly into the dark. I grabbed the bag of cheap toys I picked up last minute and knocked on the door. It creaked open on its own, revealing a darkened interior. A single candle burned on a table near the door, its flickering light casting dancing shadows across the walls. "Hello?" I called out, stepping inside. The door slammed shut behind me, and my stomach twisted. A voice answered from the shadows. "Right on time, Santa." It was a woman, her tone clipped and cold. She stepped into the candlelight, a tall, thin figure wrapped in a crimson cloak trimmed with fur. Her face was pale, her lips blood red, and her eyes, they didn't seem to reflect the light. They absorbed it. "Where are the children?" I asked. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Patience. First, you'll read the stories." She gestured to a massive leather-bound book resting on a nearby chair. Its cover was embossed with strange runes, the kind that seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them. "I wasn't told anything about this," I protested, my hand already on the door handle. The woman's smile vanished. "You agreed. You will stay." Before I could argue, something heavy skittered across the ceiling. The sound froze me in place, and the air grew icy. The breath puffed in small clouds as I slowly turned my gaze upward. Something long and angular crawled through the rafters, its body obscured by the shadows. I read the stories. The book was ancient, its pages brittle and yellowed. Each story was more disturbing than the last. Children lured by the promises of toys and sweets, only to vanish forever. The illustrations were grotesque, showing figures in crimson cloaks, just like the woman's, dragging screaming children into the dark woods. "Who wrote these?" I asked, my voice trembling. "They are not written," she replied. "They are recorded." The room seemed darker now, the candle barely illuminating the space around me. The skittering above grew louder, joined by faint whispers that I couldn't quite make out. I wanted to leave, but every time I glanced at the door, I saw those strange runes from the book faintly glowing on its surface. "You must finish," the woman commanded, her voice echoing unnaturally. When I finished the last story, she handed me a bell. It was small and silver, with an intricate pattern etched into the surface. "Ring it," she said. "I don't think I want to," I stammered, backing away. Her smile returned, sharper now. "Santa rings the bell. It's tradition." The whispers became louder, almost deafening, as the thing in the rafters dropped into the corner of the room. It was humanoid, but its limbs were too long, its joints bending the wrong way. Its face was a blank slate of flesh, other than its jagged, lipless mouth. "Ring it," she hissed, her voice now layered with something inhuman. With trembling hands, I rang the bell. Its sound was pure and bright, cutting through the oppressive noise like a blade. For a moment, the room fell silent. Then the door burst open, and a gust of icy wind extinguished the candle. The children came. But they weren't children. Not anymore. They emerged from the darkness, one by one, Their small frames twisted and malformed. Their eyes glowed faintly, and their mouths hung open in silent screams. Each one carried a tattered gift box, which they placed at my feet. "What is this?" I whispered, unable to look away. "Your gifts," the woman said, her voice dripping with mockery. "Open them." I didn't want to, but my hands moved on their own, tearing through the brittle paper. Inside each box was a fragment of something horrifying. A small, bloodied shoe, a lock of matted hair, a child's finger still wearing a tiny ring. "You see, Santa," she said, "you do not bring gifts. You collect them." The realization hit me too late. The runes on the door began to glow brighter, and the whispers returned, now screaming in unison. The children closed in around me, their hands clawing at my suit, dragging me toward the book. "You are the offering this year," the woman said. "Every Santa must pay the toll." I tried to fight, but the children's strength was unnatural. They forced me onto the book, its pages flipping wildly beneath me. The last thing I saw before the world went black was the woman's face, her smile stretching impossibly wide as she whispered, "Merry Christmas." The blackness was not empty. When I awoke, I was no longer in the cabin. I stood in a dense forest, the trees twisted in unnatural shapes, their branches curled like claws, blotting out the sky. Though faint crimson light seeped through the gaps, the air smelled of iron and decay, and the silence pressed against me like a living thing. I wasn't alone. The children were there, their misshapen forms circling me, their glowing eyes unblinking. They whispered in unison, a single chilling phrase repeated over and over, "Santa must deliver." I stumbled backward, trying to find an escape, but every direction looked the same. Trees that seemed to shift and close ranks, cutting off any path forward. Then, out of the shadows, the woman emerged again, her crimson cloak trailing behind her like a pool of blood. "Your sleigh awaits," she said, gesturing toward an open clearing. The sleigh was no sleigh at all. It was a grotesque creation of bone, its frame built from the same deer skulls I'd seen outside the cabin. Long tendrils of flesh pulsed where reins should have been, leading to beasts I could barely comprehend. They had the shape of reindeer, but their bodies were gaunt, their skin stretched thin over protruding bones. Their heads were covered in jagged antlers, and their mouths dripped with a vicious black ichor. I shook my head. "I'm not going anywhere with that." The woman's eyes narrowed. "You will." She raised her hand and the bell appeared again, now larger and darker, the etchings glowing faintly. The sound of it was deafening when she rang it, though I never saw her touch it. Pain seared through my body as my vision blurred. When it cleared, I was no longer wearing the cheap Santa suit I'd bought. Instead, I was clad in a suit made of stitched leather, cold and damp against my skin. The smell of it made my stomach churn. It wasn't leather. It was skin. My skin. The sleigh moved on its own, dragging me with it. I climbed aboard, compelled by some unseen force. The beasts lunged forward, their movements jerky and unnatural, like marionettes controlled by an unskilled puppeteer. As we soared into the crimson sky, I could see the forest stretching endlessly in every direction. Beneath us, shadows writhed and shifted, taking forms I couldn't begin to describe. The bag of toys was at my feet, but it had changed too. What once held cheap plastic trinkets was now bulging with something alive. The bag twitched and writhed, emitting faint whimpers and muffled cries. "Where are we going?" I shouted, my voice swallowed by the wind. "To deliver," came the woman's voice, though she was nowhere to be seen. The first house appeared out of nowhere. It was an old farmhouse, its windows dark, the paint peeling from its walls. The sleigh landed with a jarring thud, and the beast let out a low, guttural growl. The bag at my feet shuddered violently. "Take the gift," the voice commanded. My hands moved against my will, reaching into the bag. I pulled out a small wooden box, its surface etched with runes similar to those on the book. It was warm to the touch, almost pulsating. I approached the house, the box growing heavier with each step. When I reached the door, it swung open on its own, revealing a dimly lit interior. A child stood there, no older than 6. Their eyes were wide with fear. "Leave it," the voice whispered in my ear. I placed the box at the child's feet. As soon as I stepped back, the box snapped open and something long and spindly shot out, wrapping the child and dragging them inside. The door slammed shut, cutting off their screams. The deliveries continued. Each stop was worse than the last. The houses grew darker, the children more terrified. Some begged, others screamed, but I was powerless to stop it. Each gift was different. A doll that moves on its own, a jack-in-the-box that laughed before snapping its jaws shut, and a spinning top that emitted an ear-piercing wail. At the final house, there was no child waiting. Instead, an older man stood in the doorway, his face lined with years of hardship. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice trembling. I tried to speak, but no words came out. My hands moved on their own, presenting the last box. The man's eyes widened in horror. "No," he whispered, stepping back. "Not me. Please, not me." The box opened, and the man was pulled inside, his screams echoing long after the door slammed shut. When it was over, I returned to the forest. The woman was waiting for me, her expression serene. "You have done well," she said, her voice dripping with mockery. I fell to my knees, the weight of what I had just done crushing me. Why? Why me?" She knelt beside me, her cold hand brushing against my cheek. "Because you answered the call. Santa always answers the call." The bell appeared in her hand once more, and this time she placed it in mine. "No," I said, trying to drop it, but my fingers wouldn't obey. "You are Santa now," she said, standing, "and Santa must deliver." The sleigh appeared behind her, the beast snorting and pawing at the ground. The last thing I remember was the bell ringing. Now I'm here, waiting, watching. The bag is already full, and the list has been written in a language I can't read, but somehow understand. It's Christmas Eve again, and this time, I'll be the one coming down the chimney. I wish I could tell you that it ended there. I wish I could say that I escaped, that I found a way back home, but I can't. The cabin, the forest, the twisted sleigh, and those impossible beasts, they've become my entire world. Time here doesn't work in the way it should. Days stretch into weeks, and weeks bleed into months. Sometimes I think years pass between Christmas Eves, but then the bag twitches, the list appears, and the crimson sky reminds me that my sentence is eternal. The thing about becoming Santa, well, this Santa, is that you learn the truth about Christmas. The stories we've been told, the myths of a kind, jolly old man bringing joy to kids, they're a sanitized shadow of what used to be. The original Santa wasn't a giver of gifts. He was a taker, a collector. And I'm just the latest in a long, unbroken line of poor souls tricked into taking on the mantle. But this year's different. The first sign came when I saw the child. It was during one of the deliveries. The houses all look the same now. Darkened windows, peeling paint, the smell of rot. The sleigh lands with a customary jolt, and the beasts snarl as I approach. The gifts, the cursed, writhing abominations, practically leap from the bag. I've stopped resisting. Fighting the compulsion is pointless. But this time, as I placed the box on the doorstep and turned to leave, I felt a shift. "Santa?" a small voice called. I froze. They never speak to me. They're too scared, too aware of what's coming. But this child stepped forward, their tiny frame outlined in the flickering light from within the house. "Are you here to take me?" they asked, clutching a threadbare blanket to their chest. I tried to answer, but my mouth wouldn't move. I wanted to scream, to tell them to run, but my body betrayed me, as it always does. My hands raised, presenting the box, and the child's eyes filled with tears. But then, something strange happened. The box didn't open. It trembled violently in my hands, the runes glowing brighter and brighter until they burned my skin. The child gasped, stepping back, and for a brief moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. I returned to the forest with a question burning in my mind. What had stopped the box? Was it the kid? Was it me? I replayed the moment over and over, searching for some clue, some sign that I could use against her. Against them. The woman was waiting as always, her crimson cloak billowing in the windless air. She didn't ask about the delivery. She never does. But I caught the faintest flicker of something in her expression. Surprise. Maybe even doubt. "What happened?" I demanded, my voice hoarse from lack of use. Her smile was sharp and cruel. "You faltered," she said, circling me. "Santa does not falter." I wanted to argue, to push back, but her presence suffocated me. Her gaze felt like it was peeling back layers of my mind, searching for something it couldn't hide. "Don't make me replace you," she hissed. "You wouldn't like what comes next." I started to notice other cracks in their world. The sleigh didn't glide as smoothly as it used to, and the beasts seemed slower, less obedient. One night, as I prepared for yet another journey, I saw one of them flinch when I raised my hand. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but it was there. A flicker of fear in those hollow, glowing eyes. I began to test the limits. I started small, hesitating just a moment longer before each delivery. I tried speaking to the kids, whispering warnings they might not understand. And though the compulsion to obey was still strong, it wasn't absolute. One night, I refused to open the bag. The beast roared, the sleigh buckled violently, and the crimson sky churned with angry clouds. But the woman didn't appear. Instead, the whispers came, louder, angrier, but not omnipotent. I realized then that they couldn't hurt me directly. Not yet. The real turning point came when I found the list. The list is always there, written in that strange, shifting language, but I never paid it much attention before. It simply appeared in my mind, dictating where to go and what to deliver. But this time, I saw something different. My name was on it. It wasn't at the top where the deliveries are. It was near the bottom, scrawled in blood-red ink, next to a date that sent a chill through my bones. December 25th, 2025. That was next year. I was being replaced. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about the children or the cursed gifts. This was about me. They were preparing for a new Santa, and I was the final offering. I needed a plan. Escape was impossible. The forest was endless, the cabin impenetrable, and the sleigh only went where the list commanded. But if I couldn't leave, I could still fight back. The bell. It always started and ended the journeys. Its sound had power, though I didn't fully understand it. I began experimenting, ringing it in different ways when I was alone in the forest. Sometimes it summoned the beasts, other times it made the shadows retreat. Once, it caused the runes on my suit to flicker, almost as if they were unraveling. I realized that the bell was the key to all of this. Christmas Eve came, and this time, I was ready. The bag was heavier than ever, its contents writhing and moaning. The beasts snarled impatiently, their glowing eyes fixed on me as I climbed into the sleigh. The list burned in my mind, each name etched with terrible precision. But this time, I didn't go to the first house. Instead, I rang the bell 3 times, loud and sharp, each chime echoing through the forest. The beast reared back, the snarls turning to whimpers. The sleigh lurched violently, but I held on, forcing it to obey. The forest began to shift, the trees bending and twisting as if they were alive. The crimson sky darkened, and the whispers grew louder, overlapping in a cacophony of rage and fear. "You cannot defy us," the woman's voice said, but I could tell she was afraid. I rang the bell again, and the sleigh bucked like a wild animal. The beasts screeched, their forms twisting into shapes I could barely comprehend. The bag burst open, its contents spilling out. Shards of bones, scraps of fabric, and something that looked like a beating heart. I screamed, pouring every ounce of defiance I had into the bell's final chime. The forest erupted into chaos, the ground splitting open to reveal a churning void beneath. The woman appeared, her cloak billowing like a storm, her face contorted with fury. "You cannot escape," she hissed. "I'm not trying to escape," I spat, raising the bell. "I'm taking you with me." The bell's chimes was deafening, a sound that tore through reality itself. The force collapsed. The beast disintegrated. and the woman's scream was the last thing I heard before everything went black. I woke up in the snow. The cabin was gone. The sleigh, the base, the bag, everything had vanished. I was lying in a small clearing, the bell clutched in my hand. For a moment, I thought I was free. But then, I saw the footprints. Small, countless footprints circling me in the snow. The whispers returned, faint, but unmistakable. And then, when I looked down at the bell, I saw the runes glowing once more. They hadn't let me go. They'd only let me wait.